What happens when the leader of a democratic nation, once hailed as a rising reformer, falls? Not to a coup, not to an assassination, but to a TikTok video of his son's shopping spree in Paris. This isn't fiction, this is Mongolia in 2025, and it's a political thriller unfolding in real time. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel that breaks down the world's most unpredictable power plays, political scandals, and geopolitical flashpoints. If you're into global chaos decoded, hit that like button and subscribe now. Because today, we're diving into the dramatic downfall of Mongolian Prime Minister Oyan Erden Lufsan Namsrein. A story of power, protest, and the price of elite privilege in one of Asia's most overlooked democracies. In early 2021, Oyan Erden stood at the podium of the state Great Khural, the Mongolian parliament, with a mandate like no other. Harvard-educated, telegenic, and just 40 years old, he was the youngest prime minister in Mongolian history and the first to publicly embrace the idea that democracy in Asia could be digital, clean, and equitable. His premiership began with bold proclamations, digitizing government, cracking down on corruption, and renegotiating exploitative mining deals that long plagued Mongolia's economy. Global media took notice. Time named him one of Asia's rising reformers. The Diplomat hailed him as the techno-populist Mongolia never knew it needed. But even from the start, Oyan Erden's image was tightly choreographed, his speeches rehearsed, his cabinet stacked with young technocrats, his critics silent not by law but by public momentum. For a while it worked. He introduced the Vision 2050 initiative, promised transparency with blockchain-powered government transactions, and even launched a mobile app that allowed citizens to submit corruption complaints directly to his office. Yet, behind the scenes, the old machinery remained untouched. Cryonism persisted. Parliamentary allies grew quiet, and most dangerously, his inner circle became increasingly opaque. By late 2025, whispers began circulating. Luxury vehicles arriving at private government lots, school tuitions paid in euros, family members previously unknown popping up in elite social media circles. But it wasn't until November that changed everything. A teenager in Paris, a Balenciaga jacket, a €2,000 price tag. The son of the prime minister filmed shopping on the Champs-Élysées, laughing as he posed in front of Gucci, Dior, and Louis Vuitton. The footage wasn't leaked by a rival party, it was posted on TikTok by the teenager himself. Within hours, it was viral. Within days, it was historic. As the Diplomat would later write, it wasn't the price tag, it was the contrast, the arrogance, the insult. In a nation where nearly 1 in 5 people live below the poverty line and where winter temperatures drop below -40 degrees Celsius, this displayed a wealth that triggered something deeper than anger. It triggered betrayal. In the next section, we're going to talk about the protests that erupted. December snow fell heavy on Ulaanbaatar as the first chants began. Enough is enough. They weren't shouted by seasoned protesters, they were typed, tweeted, uploaded. The first digital protest took shape not in the streets, but online. TikTok, Twitter, and Facebook exploded with memes, parody videos, and stitched commentary. The hashtag #BalenciagaBoy trended for 72 hours straight in Mongolia. Then came the marches. Thousands gathered in Sukhbatar Square, waving hand signs reading "Corruption is the real virus" and "Reform or resign." Miners from Orkhon province arrived in buses. Students from National University of Mongolia walked out of lectures. Even Buddhist monks from Gobi monasteries arrived to chant mantras for moral cleansing. Duchwell reported that within 72 hours, over 30,000 people had taken to the streets. The protests spread to Erdent, Darkhan, and coal-rich Bayankongor, regions where economic inequality had been simmering for years. Why mining towns? Because the anger wasn't just about wealth, it was about who controls it. For decades, Mongolia's economy has depended on copper, gold, and coal, extracted by foreign giants like Rio Tinto under contracts many believed were unfair. Oyan Erden had promised to fix those deals. But now, with his son flaunting wealth abroad, critics said he had simply joined the club. Police forces were dispatched in waves, tear gas was used on the third night, and internet throttling followed. Government spokespeople accused the protests of being foreign-influenced, but the people didn't stop. At night, smartphones glowed across the capital like fireflies. Videos of riot police were uploaded in real time, and anonymous Telegram channels instructed protesters where to regroup, what to wear, and how to stay safe. AP News reported that a secret network of IT students coordinated VPN distribution, allowing citizens to bypass government blocks. This wasn't just a protest, it was a digital uprising, a TikTok revolution in one of Asia's most rugged democracies. As the protests grew, the ruling Mongolian People's Party, or MPP, began to fracture. Behind closed doors, MPP lawmakers feared the worst, a revolution at their doorstep and an international embarrassment that could scare off billions in investment. On May 29, 2025, the opposition Democratic Party introduced a formal vote of no confidence. It was a gamble. Historically, no confidence motions in Mongolia are symbolic. The ruling party has held supermajorities for years, but something has changed. MPs, afraid of being caught on the wrong side of history, began switching sides. On June 3, 2025, the unthinkable happened. Oyan Erden lost his vote. He secured only 44 votes out of the 64 required to maintain office. The chamber erupted, not in applause, but in stunned silence. Outside, however, the people did not wait. Crowds gathered in front of the state palace. Flags waved, teenagers screamed, some wept. Smartphones rose into the air as if in ceremony, recording not just the fall of a leader, but the rise of a generation that had claimed victory not through violence, but through data, persistence, and memes. Reuters called it Asia's first digital-led democratic ouster. Politico described it as a moment when Mongolia's youth rewrote the future in 240 characters or less. And just like that, Mongolia's youngest reforming prime minister became its most ironic casualty. A man brought to power by promises of transparency, undone by the very transparency he once championed. In this next section, we will elaborate on the deeper psychological profile of Oyan Erden, Mongolia's mining dilemma, and the double-edged sword of digital democracy. To truly understand Mongolia's political tragedy, we have to examine the man at its center. Born in 1980 in Khenti Province, a rugged steppe region historically known for producing warriors, not politicians, Oyan Erden grew up in a country still transitioning from Soviet-era governance. He witnessed firsthand the volatility of Mongolia's early democratic years, hyperinflation, political infighting, and the collapse of the social infrastructure. He wasn't born into privilege. Raised by a single mother, he earned a scholarship to study journalism at the Mongolian National University. Later, he was accepted into Harvard Kennedy School, where he studied governance and innovation. To his supporters, this was the ultimate bootstrap success story. When he returned to Mongolia, he carried not just a degree, but an ideology, modernized through transparency, reform, through technology. He joined the Mongolian People's Party and quickly became a key advisor to then Prime Minister Ukhanigin Khurelsukh. In 2021, when Khurelsukh stepped aside, Oyan Erden was seen as the natural heir. Young, Western-educated, and ambitious, he was billed as a technocrat who could finally root out corruption from the old guard. He spoke the language of reform. He launched citizens' feedback platforms, drafted open data laws, and was the face of Vision 2050, a sweeping initiative aimed at transforming Mongolia into a middle-income nation within 3 decades. He was, for a moment, the hope of a generation. But as Time magazine reported, it wasn't policy failure that brought him down, it was optics. Despite legislative wins, the benefits of reform never trickled down. Ulaanbaatar smog remained toxic. Rural roads crumbled, youth unemployment hovered at 17%, and as inflation crept up, salaries stagnated. Meanwhile, the inner circle around Oyan Erden appeared to flourish. Government contracts went to familiar names. Appointees were friends, cousins, and loyalists. And then came the video. The footage of his son didn't just expose hypocrisy, it shattered a carefully cultivated myth. The reformer wasn't immune to the rot, he was part of it. The world may see Mongolia as a remote, landlocked nation, famous for Genghis Khan and little else, but its geopolitical relevance has never been more critical. Mongolia sits atop some of the world's most sought-after mineral deposits: copper, coal, uranium, and rare earth metals. As the global economy shifts towards electrification, copper in particular has become the new oil. And Mongolia, wedged between China and Russia, holds massive reserves. Rio Tinto's Oyan Tolgoi project, located in the Gobi Desert, is one of the largest copper and gold mines on Earth. It's estimated to supply up to 10% of the world's copper once fully operational. Under Oyan Erden, Mongolia renegotiated its share in Oya Tolgoi, increasing state equity to 34% and promising greater environmental oversight. It was seen as a victory for resource nationalism. But with his downfall, that stability is gone. As The Australian reported, Rio Tinto has already frozen several exploratory initiatives, citing regulatory ambiguity. Chinese firms, meanwhile, are quietly lobbying for new access contracts, eager to undercut Western investment. Why does this matter? Because in the race to decarbonize the control of critical minerals in a geopolitical arms race, if Mongolia falls into political disarray or into Beijing's orbit, then the West loses a key strategic ally. Worse, it risks ceding control of essential green technologies to a rival power. Already, over 90% of Mongolia's exports go to China. As Politico notes, even Mongolia's rail and energy infrastructure is China-dependent. Without careful navigation, Mongolia's democracy could become a mirage, its sovereignty mortgaged to Beijing. Mongolia's political crisis was born on the internet, but its legacy will depend on how the internet is used going forward. The fall of Oyan Erden marked one of the first times in modern Asian history that a government was toppled not by journalists or opposition leaders, but by meme culture. The TikTok that exposed his son's shopping spree was shared over 12 million times in 5 days. Twitter threads broke down the price of each luxury item. Facebook groups called for digital demonstrations using profile pictures and banner filters. As Civicus Mana reported, activists used live streams and encrypted channels to bypass censorship. The government tried to block Twitter and TikTok access for 48 hours, and VPN usage spiked 600%. But this digital revolution wasn't without cost. By late 2025, over 40 digital activists had been detained for cyber sedition. Several IT students were interrogated. A leading news site, icon.mn, was raided after publishing an expose on government spending. The internet, once the people's tool, was now under threat. Yet even amid repression, the youth remained undeterred. A TikTok creator named @NomadicJustice began uploading daily videos, each one creatively weaving together satire, historic symbolism, and policy analysis. Within 2 weeks, he had over 800,000 followers and became the de facto spokesperson for the movement. One video featured Genghis Khan edited into Parliament, glaring at MPs while text overlays read, "You dishonor the steps." It was funny, but it hit a nerve. This wasn't just a digital protest, it was generational storytelling. A new Mongolian identity was being forged in memes, live streams, and 30-second videos. But the question remains, can digital democracy sustain a political movement? Or will the state, armed with surveillance laws and outdated cybercrime statutes, eventually crush it? In this next section, we will discuss Mongolia's post-resignation uncertainty, the structural reform challenges, and what Mongolia's future might really look like. When Oyan Erden stepped down on June 3, 2025, Mongolia entered an unfamiliar phase: democratic uncertainty. There was no military takeover, no immediate power vacuum, but what followed was something more insidious: a political fog. The Mongolian People's Party, or MPP, which had previously backed Oyan Erden, scrambled to regroup. Publicly, they issued statements praising his service. Privately, factions formed overnight: reformers versus loyalists, technocrats versus the old guard. The Speaker of Parliament, Gombo Javan Zandanshatar, became acting Prime Minister, but his authority was shaky. According to Duchwell, his first address was met with jeers from outside the state palace. Protesters chanted, "We want elections, not another puppet." Within the ruling party, whispers of a snap election grew louder. Meanwhile, the opposition's Democratic Party, long weakened by infighting, saw a surge in youth support. A new wing, led by 31-year-old activist Ukenzil Bat-Erdin, began circulating a draft reform manifesto titled Digital Democracy 2.0. But even with the growing momentum, the opposition faced an uphill battle. Mongolia's political system remains semi-parliamentary, with procedural hurdles that make sudden transitions rare. And outside of parliament, the streets were restless. Daily protests continued for nearly 3 weeks after Oyen Erden's resignation. What began as an anti-corruption movement evolved into a broader call for constitutional reform, campaign finance transparency, and stricter anti-nepotism laws. As AP News noted, for the first time in decades, protesters weren't just demanding a new face, they were demanding a new system. In this next section, we're going to discuss about the limits of reform, because the calls for structural change grew louder, but they ran headlong into Mongolia's deeply embedded institutional inertia. The country's semi-presidential system means that executive power is split between the prime minister and the president. In theory, this provides checks and balances. In practice, it creates gridlock and encourages blame shifting. President Ukhanagin Kurulsek, himself a former prime minister, remained mostly silent during the crisis. Critics accused him of abandoning the democratic experiment he once championed. Meanwhile, the Anti-Corruption Agency of Mongolia, though legally independent, faced internal divisions. According to Civicus Monitor, several investigators resigned in protest over political interference. A leaked memo published by GoGo News alleged that investigations into state-linked corporations were being reclassified as internal reviews. Civil society groups tried to fill the gap. A coalition of 42 NGOs submitted a constitutional petition to mandate term limits for MPs and introduce public disclosures of family wealth. But Parliament stalled. Weeks turned into months, bills were drafted then buried in committee. The once vibrant calls for reform began to feel like echoes in a marble hall. Mongolia now stands at a crossroads. The digital revolution that brought down a prime minister has not yet produced a viable replacement. Youth movements are energized but fragmented, and civil servants remain risk-averse. Investors are hesitant. And outside the borders, regional powers are watching. China has remained diplomatically silent but economically assertive. According to The Australian, Chinese state companies have begun fast-tracking infrastructure proposals, hoping to take advantage of Mongolia's instability. Russia, facing its own geopolitical setbacks, has sent quiet signals of support from Mongolia's traditionalist factions, aiming to preserve its regional buffer. The West divided. The U.S. State Department issued a statement praising Mongolia's peaceful democratic resilience, but offered no new trade guarantees. The EU extended its GSP Plus tariff privileges, but only conditionally. And so Mongolia drifts. A nation celebrated as a democratic outlier in Central Asia now risks becoming a cautionary tale. Whether it becomes a regional success story or another case study in backsliding democracy will depend not on one leader, but on whether its institutions, civil society, and citizens can build something beyond a moment. Something lasting. In the final section of today's video, we will explore the generational legacy of 2025, Mongolia's lessons for global democracies, and a closing reflection on digital power in fragile states. For decades, Mongolian politics was the realm of older men, Soviet-era veterans, and bureaucratic holdovers from a previous century. But 2025 shattered that pattern. The protests, while sparked by a luxury scandal, had tapped into something far deeper, a generational disillusionment with incrementalism. For Mongolians born after the 1990 democratic transition, their entire political memory had been marked by promises deferred, reforms abandoned, and scandals recycled. Now, for the first time, they weren't just voters, they were agents of change. The youth-led activism of 2025 gave rise to dozens of new civic tech startups. One group launched Kuralskan, an app that tracked MP voting records and campaign promises. Another founded Step Voices, a podcast collective aimed at educating young Mongolians on legislative policies. Universities began offering courses in digital governance, democratic resilience, and disinformation resistance. Political science departments saw record enrollment. Student unions that once organized concerts were now hosting constitutional debates. The scandal, in retrospect, may have been a political catastrophe, but for Mongolia's Gen Z, it was also a political awakening. Mongolia's crisis might seem like a local drama, but it mirrors a global pattern. From Brazil to Sri Lanka, Tunisia to Thailand, the 2020s have been marked by a strange paradox. democratic frameworks paired with rising authoritarian behaviors. Leaders campaign on reform, then erode the systems they vow to protect. Mongolia's case stands out for 3 reasons. First, the speed of the fall. A single viral video triggered mass mobilization, a parliamentary revolt, and the resignation of a sitting prime minister in less than 60 days. Second, the youth digital fusion, where other protests lean on labor unions or opposition parties. Mongolians' uprising was decentralized and meme-powered. As Politico observed, TikTok did what think tanks couldn't. Third, the aftermath. Rather than descending into violence or autocracy, Mongolia hovered in a democratic holding pattern. Neither collapse nor resolution. For political scientists, this poses a challenge. Can digital momentum create structural reform, or does virality only produce flashpoint politics? Mongolia's story offers no easy answers, but plenty of warnings. In the end, the Mongolian crisis of 2025 wasn't just about politics. It was about visibility. The illusion of control destroyed by a teenager's social media posts, the promise of reform discredited by luxury branding, the myth of elite invulnerability punctured by digital outrage. And the truth that even in one of the world's most remote democracies, the balance of power has changed. Today, a government's greatest threat isn't foreign invasion or insurgency. It's exposure. One clip, one tweet, one mistake. But exposure cuts both ways. As the dust settles, Mongolia stands not only at a political crossroads, but at a narrative inflection point. Will it be remembered as the nation that succumbed to a youth-driven instability, or the one that adapted, evolved, and pioneered a new form of participatory politics fit for the digital age? Time will tell. But one thing is clear: democracy no longer dies in darkness. In Mongolia, it was challenged in daylight and maybe, just maybe, reborn through pixels. Thanks for staying with me through this wild, real-world political thriller. If you found this breakdown powerful, insightful, or just straight up fascinating, give me a like. It really helps grow the channel. And if you want more stories like this about the places the headlines forget, the leaders the world misunderstands, and the revolutions you might have missed, subscribe now. Because in today's world, a phone can take down a government, and democracy, it just might be going viral. See you in the next one. Thanks, guys.